Hello, everyone. Welcome. Jamin Shively here, and I'm going to go through a presentation of the main platforms that we're developing on and related to Radish. So I'll be going through a bunch of slides, and my dad will be looking on. So Dad, feel free to say anything if you'd like, and we'll get rolling here. Okay, so starting with the presentation, this will just take a minute to pull up. Oh, actually, let me go back and do screen share, entire screen, share, present to everyone. And so Dad, just so you know, it's now showing everything that's on the screen is now being recorded. So they can no longer see us, but they can see what's on the screen here. So this is radish.org, co-creating solutions to the world's most daunting problems. And I got that word from you. So here's the agenda for today. I'm going to go through a little bit of background, mainly on myself and kind of where I'm coming from in all this. Then I'll talk about the world's problems. Then I'll talk about solutions to the world's problems, including Radish and the compassionate economy. All right, so background. Years ago in the late 90s, one of the projects I worked on was creating a system to optimize all of Cemex's production and distribution using artificial intelligence. And so that gave me that and other projects that were related to that, where I was working with Natural Selection Incorporated, the developers of some amazing artificial intelligence technology. We worked on a number of projects, both within natural selection and outside of it. And it gave me a big, broad perspective, particularly working with the founder, Dr. Lawrence Fogel, who was one of the early pioneers in artificial intelligence. That gave me a big, broad perspective on that we can create intelligent systems to help optimize very, very complex networks. And ultimately, I would go on to apply this to creating a system for ending world hunger, which we'll talk about. Later, I founded Shively International, where we were building and operating educational computer centers inside public schools in Mexico. And here in the lower left, I'm signing a contract with the governor of the state of Sinaloa, Governor Juan Millan. And there was a bunch of press. It was a big story in Mexico. In fact, 9 months later, as we were inaugurating our 25th computer center, then President Vicente Fox came to inaugurate that computer center, and that was a big deal. Later, working for Microsoft as corporate strategy manager, I architected and developed a system called Project Zurich for optimizing Microsoft's online networks. And another big project I did was Project Venice, designed to leapfrog Google into the much bigger space, bigger than business to consumer advertising and marketing, is business to business. And so I developed Project Venice to take advantage of that opportunity. And then after Microsoft and after working on a food-related startup, I was working on a system to optimize food production and distribution across all major categories of food: grains, produce, livestock, even processed foods, etc. And the software development was going great, but I had the ongoing challenge of how are we going to raise enough money in order to be able to solve world hunger. And so along came the legalization of cannabis. So one of the ways that I determined that we could raise substantial funds was to create a brand. My goal was to create the #1 brand of cannabis in the world, based on my great-grandfather Diego Pellicer's legacy as the largest grower of hemp in the world in the Victorian era. And so I set about building a major brand of cannabis, with the intention of dedicating my profits, my share of the profits, to the eradication of hunger. And as soon as I launched this and started sharing this concept of what we were doing, the media became very, very interested. And this was the first public interview that I did for Kairos 7 in Seattle. The Taiwanese picked up on the story and created this funny anime character of me as the Bill Gates of Bud. And that really took off. And then I was invited back to New York, where I did an interview on Fox Business that went really well. Then I was also interviewed on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. But what really got things rolling was when former Mexican President Vicente Fox accepted my invitation to come up and do a big press conference in Seattle. And that got international attention because he was advocating for legalization as a way to end the drug war and take cannabis out of the hands of the drug cartels and put it in the hands of a regulated industry where it can be taxed and controlled and end the violence that's destroying his country. So there we are on CNN with Wolf Blitzer. This is an image of that press conference that we did in Seattle at the end of May 2013, a little over 2 years ago. The image in the upper right is the front page of the Seattle Times the very next morning. So it was very big news. We went on to do 4 events that summer total, culminating in a big 3-day symposium in Mexico on the legalization and medical use of cannabis. And we had representatives from Uruguay there. And a few months later, Uruguay legalized cannabis. It was the first country in the world to legalize cannabis. So all of a sudden, it's like, wow, wait a second. We're having international impacts on one of the world's major problems, which is prohibition. And we then got the insight to go after all the world's problems in a holistic, simultaneous fashion. What are some of the bigger world problems that we have? Well, climate change is a gigantic one. Naomi Klein's outstanding book on the topic is a really good read. This is causing this and changes to land use. Oh, whoops. Wait a second. It's wanting to do some install of updates here. Let me close that. That and land use changes and devastation to natural resources and ecosystems is driving mass extinctions of many species around the world. Climate change, global warming is only one of several major problems that are devastating our planet and making life uninhabitable for many species and eventually humans as well, unless we turn things around dramatically. Just last month in July, some new data came out. A new report came out led by James Hansen, who's the leading climatologist, that unless some substantial changes happen to the way humans are living and consuming hydrocarbons, emissions, et cetera, that multi-meter sea level rise will become practically unavoidable. And we need to make changes very quickly if we're going to avoid that. But now these problems and these forecasts of major catastrophes have been forecast for decades, and yet we are not taking action in anywhere near as quickly or decisively as we should be, which brings us to a problem compounding the problem, which is indicated on the title of this excellent book, which is Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. So not only do we have the underlying problems, we have these problems compounding problems, and we also have some very vicious cycles. Hunger and poverty is driving overpopulation. Poverty is the main driver of overpopulation. Overpopulation in turn is driving the destruction of the planet, which in turn is causing even more hunger and poverty, and it's a very vicious cycle. And in fact, those are some of several interrelated mega problems, which I'll just hold here on the screen for a couple of seconds for us to read through. All interrelated. Now, one of the major purposes of Radish is to get to the roots of the world's problems. And here we're developing a taxonomy, the beginnings of a taxonomy. The ellipses in the lower left indicate that this is just the beginning. There are many, many other problems. But if you look at environment, for example, two of the main sub-problems under environment are climate change and desertification, which is a major driver of climate change. And in fact, those two, climate change and desertification, form their own little mini vicious cycle. And there's lots and lots of vicious cycles, as we talked about. So if those are the world's problems, let's take a look at some of the root causes. And there's a lot of different angles on the root causes. I'm going to focus on one particular one, which I think is probably the main driver of a lot of the world's problems. And I indicated graphically here. What are the root causes? Well, one root cause is world income distribution. And if you set the fact that the wealthiest 1% own the majority of the resources, and the majority of the population lives on next to nothing. Now, if you set aside the morality of that and the fairness of that, and just look at planet Earth as a system, as a whole, there are two main problems with this picture. One is that where you have poverty here on the bottom, with this red ellipse, you see that poverty is the main engine of overpopulation, particularly rural poor. When I did volunteer work in poor rural Mexico back in the 80s, I witnessed firsthand a very strong correlation. The poorest families typically have the largest number of kids, and 8, 10, 12, 14 kids were not uncommon in rural Mexico at that time, nor is that uncommon today. So you have poverty driving overpopulation, and then of all these people, these growing numbers of people, they're all trying to move to the right and make as much money as they can. And the ones who are way over on this far extreme, the wealthiest 1%, are over-consuming planetary resources. And that is the main engine of planetary destruction. So you've got too many people consuming too many resources and destroying too many ecosystems and causing too much global warming and all the effects of that. So if those are the problems, including the roots of the problems, focusing on income distribution, what are the solutions? So let's take a look. So at a high level, if a root cause is income distribution, which is mainly a problem of economics, what would be a radical solution, or a solution that gets to the root of the problem? And in fact, what's interesting is the Latin root of the word radish is the word radix, R-A-D-I-X, which means root. And radix, the Latin word radix, is also the root of the word radical. So a radical solution is a solution that gets to the very root of the problem. And so the radical solution that we're proposing is the transformation of the global economy. If the economy is the problem, let's address it at the level of the economy. And that begets yet another taxonomy, which is a taxonomy of the global economy. You can consider the major economic sectors, subsectors, industries, categories, etc. And so now how are we going to go about transforming this big taxonomy of the global economy? So that's what we're going to set about to delve into in the rest of the presentation. And the solutions that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk at kind of three different levels or three different stages. The first stage, I'm going to talk about eradicating world hunger. And the solution, that's the opportunity, and the solution to that we're proposing is the creation of a compassionate economy. And we'll talk about that in depth. From there, we're going to expand it to eradicating poverty generally, leveraging a higher form of intelligence. And I'll talk very in detail and specifics what I mean by that. And then the final level is going beyond the eradication of poverty. First, I'll just mention the eradication of poverty is crucial for halting population growth. And that's ultimately what we need to grapple with. The planet simply cannot sustain the 7+ billion people that we have today, much less 10, 12 billion or larger numbers that we're barreling down, that we're staring down the barrel of if we don't eradicate poverty. And then finally, the third and final level is reversing climate change and healing our planet, halting the destruction and actually healing the ecosystems that we've been destroying. And reversing climate change is crucial for that. And the solution that we expand to there is what I call the higher form of intelligence squared, which I'll talk about briefly, and then I'll cover that in a subsequent presentation. So, starting with eradicating hunger via the compassionate economy. So I set the context for this in a 5-minute video, which is on the homepage of radish.org, called the Hungerless Games, and I encourage everyone to watch that. In fact, you might even want to pause this video if you haven't seen that yet and watch that first. It's just a 5-minute video. Very well done. And so the solution we're proposing is the transformation of the global economy for eradicating hunger and ultimately poverty. And so phase 1 of the compassionate economy, creating the compassionate economy. So you see here, we now span both taxonomies of global issues and the global economy. Phase 1 is eradicate hunger, leveraging by transforming the cannabis and hemp industry and turning it into the world's first compassionate industry. And at the same time that we set about eradicating hunger, we'll also accelerate the eradication of prohibition. So we can actually pick off these two major global issues at once. So how are we going to do that? We're creating a compassionate economy. And before I talk about exactly how we're going to do that, let's delve a bit more into the root problem of the world income distribution. How did the world income distribution get to be the way that it is? Well, let's take a look at one example. A large corporation like Coca-Cola, which sells its products to everyone, to rich and poor, takes the income, does its internal operations, and deposits the net profit in the hands of the shareholders, who are the wealthiest 1%. So what it's doing, it's essentially a concentration of wealth function. That's what the Coca-Cola company is doing. Well, the global economy in aggregate is doing exactly the same thing. Whether it's small family-owned businesses or large mega corporations, the profits go to the owners, and the owners are the wealthiest folks. So at a system level, remember we were talking about this at a system level earlier, and the two main problems with this, which are overpopulation on the left-hand side and overconsumption of resources on the right. This concentration of wealth at a system level makes about as much sense as if you're a farmer. Let's say you're a farmer with a 100-acre farm, right? And let's say that this big mountain represents fertilizer. And so the best way to get the maximal, highest and best use out of the farm as a whole would be to spread that fertilizer around to the entire field. But instead, what we're doing with the global economy is we're concentrating it. It's as if we're going around the field with a vacuum cleaner, sucking up all the resources and depositing them here on the right-hand side. Putting the money in the hands of those who need it the least, as opposed to those who need it the most. And yes, there are mechanisms to counter that, such as taxation and donation, but the bottom line is they're not doing the job. Now, in talking about the solution, which we're going to talk about next, context is decisive. And there's a context for humanity that we're kind of born into, which is, I'll just call it the system. And that system includes going to school and learning how to essentially be good workers, good employees, or depending on the educational track that we're on, it might be training us to build businesses and hoard the wealth from those businesses. Now, what's the second bullet here? Gay marriage. The reason I bring that up is just as an example. This is a great example of how we can change our context. We can change the system. 20, 30 years ago, gay marriage was kind of unheard of. And now, just in the last 12 months, that whole conversation has been utterly transformed. It's now that the battle for gay marriage has been won. And now that's seen as just a basic human right. You can love and marry whoever you want. And so in terms of the context of the system and being born into a system, there's a really funny video I want to show. So let me just play this real quickly. And it's a Geico ad. And I'll just play it. It's self-explanatory. Let me do a full screen here and go.
Whoa. Who's responsible for this?
If something goes wrong, you find a scapegoat.
Rick.
It's what you do.
What'd you say?
Want to save 15% or more on car insurance? You switch to Geico. It's what you do.
Rick, don't walk away from me.
Okay. So thanks for watching that. The main punchline of that is that in the context of building a business and hoarding all the profits, well, that's just what you do, right? That's what we're taught to do. That's the context that we grow up in, the system that we grow up in, is if you're going to build a business, you hoard the wealth, and that perpetuates the system of concentration of wealth. And I'm here to tell you that there is another way, and that other way is to do a radical transformation and redirect the flow of the profits from the wealthiest 1% to those people and planetary systems, ecosystems, et cetera, that need it the most. And pointing the way is Paul Newman of Newman Zone, who founded Newman Zone, where they send all profits to charity. So if you look on the same graph, what are they doing? They're selling to the wealthier segments of society, selling to the rich, and giving to the poor. They're reversing that flow. Our vision is to create a compassionate economy, or more specifically, a compassionate sector of the global economy, which will perform the same function. And look at what happens to the part of the graph on the lower left as we pump significant resources towards those people and the planet, parts of the planet that need it the most, is we raise the floor. And that is how we're setting about to eradicate poverty, where the first step is the eradication of hunger. But the ultimate goal is the eradication of poverty. Now, the way that we're going to do this is we're creating a new standard for the global economy, which is certified compassionate. And there's 3 pillars to certified compassionate: all profits to the eradication of hunger, socially transformational, and environmentally transformational. And the lead brand, the lead compassionate brand that we're launching is Sato Hemp. And so I've got a quick 1-minute video that I want to show you of the Satos introducing themselves. And here we go.
アメリカの皆さん、こんにちは。私は日本で長年ヘンプの仕事をしています、佐藤と申します。佐藤ヘンプのメンバーの金城と申します。今回はジェイメンさんの紹介でこのような貴重な機会を設けていただきありがとうございます。日本は約1万2000年前より大麻を栽培し、衣食住すべてにおいて活用してきた長い歴史と文化があります。佐藤ヘンプはこの長い歴史の中で培った大麻の持つさまざまな特性を生かし、自然とともに調和し共生できる持続可能な社会を実現していくための新しいライフスタイルを創造していきます。私たちはまず利益を 100% 世界中の飢餓と貧困の撲滅に使います。どうか私たちと一緒に新しい時代の経済を創造していきましょう。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
All right. Thank you, Takuya-san. So that is a brief introduction, and they made this for a presentation that we gave in Florida a few weeks back. And they also put together some slides, which I'll just run through. I'll just let you read them. So they're leading the way. Sato Hemp and the Sato family are leading the way in the establishment of this new compassionate standard, certified compassionate. And in so doing, they're putting compassion in fashion. We're actually transforming what it means for something to be fashionable in clothing. And Sato Hemp is the first of a family of brands that we're building, which we call the Robin Hood brands, selling to the rich and giving to the poor. And this is the net effect of what we're talking about. We talk about hunger as it's really a very low-hanging fruit. Among all the world's problems, eradicating hunger, it represents low-hanging fruit. It's one of the cheapest and easiest problems to solve. It'll only take about $50 billion per year to solve it. And as we don't have to scale it in a single bound. And as we go about eradicating hunger, the story builds and we'll get maximum leverage out of the story. In fact, the virtuous cycle of eradicating hunger is represented here. What I'm telling today is a story about how we're going to set about eradicating hunger or helping to close the gap. That in turn will stimulate conversations about what we're doing, which in turn will stimulate demand for compassionate products, which in turn will incentivize the investment in the supply side, and supply meeting the demand will generate the profits to eradicate hunger by 2020. That's a story. And of course, the more we do it, the more this virtuous cycle ensues. So certified compassionate is the key. And this new standard, which we call the CCC standard, that's literally the image that you'll see on products and services that are certified compassionate. This builds on a growing trend, as we can see in this graph here. But what we're going to do is we're going to leverage a very powerful mechanism in marketing, which is what's called bifurcation. And I'll talk in detail about that. But at a high level, we're going to be bifurcating companies in the global economy into those which are part of the traditional, what we call the economy of hoarding, where the profits are accumulated in the hands of the wealthy shareholders, versus the economy of sharing, where all profits go to the eradication of hunger and ultimately beyond, for eradicating poverty and healing the planet, as we'll talk about. But right now, let's focus on ending hunger. So what is bifurcation? I'm going to give some examples of bifurcation. I'm going to talk about Pepsi versus Coke, organic versus non-organic, retail, online versus brick and mortar, and then I'm going to talk about the entire global economy and how we're going to bifurcate the entire global economy with this new standard, CCC. So here goes. So let's first talk about one specific category of product, of food and beverage, that is, which is the cola category. And at first, there was just Coca-Cola. And then there was Coca-Cola and some very tiny competitors with single-digit market share that didn't amount to much. And then one of those little competitors bifurcated the category into old versus young, right? Which is a false dichotomy in this case, because it was the same sugar water, right? It was just one brand versus another, but through clever marketing, Pepsi was able to position themselves as the beverage of young people. And they ended up going from single-digit market share to being very close to being on parity with Coca-Cola. So their market share shot up by leaps and bounds, and of course their profits as well. Now let's look at the food industry. Let's go from one category within the food and beverage industry to the entire food and beverage industry. First, there was just food. And then certified organic came along and bifurcated the food and beverage industry into organic versus everything else. Essentially good food versus bad food. Another somewhat false dichotomy, less false than the Coke versus Pepsi one, but still far from being absolutely true, the good versus bad, because there's plenty of bad foods that are organic and there's plenty of good foods that are non-organic. But let's take a look at some of these organic brands that sprang up as a result of this standard. Horizon Organic really led the way as the first nationally known brand of organic product, and that was born out of the RBST scare. And once people started getting in the habit of buying Horizon Organic, they started buying a bunch of other organic brands as well, and it just exploded. I mean, there are multi-billion-dollar brands, multi-hundred-million-dollar brands, multi-$10 million brands. If you want to have a good old-fashioned all-American barbecue, it can be all organic. You can even have organic briquettes, for crying out loud. You can bring your girlfriend organic flowers. If you get lucky, you can sleep it off on an organic mattress. And after that, you can light up an organic cigarette. Finally, a cigarette that's good for you. Just kidding. But it just goes to show how big this category has, this bifurcation has grown. If you look at the numbers, it's close to 100 billion per year and growing by double digits. Now, let's go from that one industry of food and beverage to an entire sector of the economy, the retail sector. First, there was just retail. You wanted to buy something, you go to a store and buy it. And then along came the internet, and it was bifurcated. The retail sector became bifurcated into brick and mortar versus online. And of course, online is growing by leaps and bounds and very profitably. Just ask Amazon. Now let's take it from one sector of the economy being retail to the entire global economy. We're going to bifurcate the global economy into the economy of hoarding versus the economy of sharing, characterized by CCC. Okay, that's what we've been discussing. And the bifurcation will be shown across all different categories, starting with consumer products, starting with Sato hemp. But for every major category, such as cola, we'll have at least one certified compassionate option, such as healthy cola, which will be sweetened by organic stevia, and again, all profits going to the eradication of hunger. Instead of showing off on Facebook, you can change the world by going to the Radish social network. And the impacts of our purchasing, we're going to highlight. Purchase from the hoarding companies, the profits go to make the rich even richer. Purchase from compassionate companies, we're eradicating hunger, and the choice is yours. Now, you can say, well, that all sounds well and good, but how is, one little brand like Sato Hemp going to do this? And well, the answer is Sato Hemp is not going to do it alone. They're going to lead the way, but think about it from the exponential domino perspective. There's a cute video which you can look up online by the Smithsonian that shows how that first domino in the lower right there had to be placed by tweezers. It was so tiny. And then a few dominoes later, it's knocking over, a multi-100-pound domino, 29 dominoes to knock over the Empire State Building with this exponential approach. And we'll talk more about this analogy a bit later. But the main point here is from relatively small beginnings, and of course, Horizon Organic Milk started off small, but grew extremely rapidly with the RBST scare, and then that spawned a huge explosion in organic brands. So a big part of the reason, a lot of people ask, well, why start with hunger, right? There's more pressing issues than hunger, such as climate change and multi-meter sea level rise, which will cause much more devastation and actually cause much more hunger than we have today at a much larger scale. So why are we starting with hunger? There's two reasons. One is that it's among the easiest and cheapest problems to solve of the world's problems. And it will also have extremely high psychological, sociological, and cultural impact. Virtually everyone agrees that hunger is a really bad thing and that if we can end it, we should. And in the process of eradicating hunger through building a compassionate economy, this will drive tremendous unity among people. Everyone will get on board once they see that the strategy is actually working. And we're going to take that unity and then expand to the next level here in the middle, where it says the opportunity of eradicating poverty through the development of a higher form of intelligence. We're still going to be growing the compassionate economy during this second phase, but what's really going to kick in is the development of a higher form of intelligence. And let's talk about that. A higher form of intelligence, we'll get into the details in a second, but at a high level, it's a very easy and cheap thing to create, and combined with the unity that we're going to forge through eradicating hunger, this higher form of intelligence we can use to solve the rest of the world's problems. So we start with hunger, create unity, build a higher form of intelligence, and then go after the rest of the world's problems, because some of the rest of the world's problems are so wicked. They're called wicked problems. They practically defy characterization, much less solution. So rather than relying on human brains operating in isolation of one another and collaborating on very low-level ways, we're actually talking about high levels of collaboration and, in fact, creating a higher form of intelligence. So let me go through just the basics of that. What are the elements that make up intelligence, whether low-level or high-level? Well, we're talking here about creating a higher form of human intelligence. So we're essentially taking human processing power and expanding it by putting, just like you can put batteries together in series and power, a Tesla, a whole electric car, or, very powerful machinery, we're going to be essentially putting human brains in series. And we'll talk about more about that in a second. Memory is also a crucial element of intelligence. aim is a unified aim is an absolutely vital level element of creating a higher form of intelligence. Imagine those batteries, instead of being aligned, were opposing each other. They would just cancel out, and we wouldn't get anywhere. And in fact, that's a lot of the problem that we have with the world today, is that individuals are operating at the level of individuals, and each one is trying to seek the maximization of their own personal goals, which unfortunately are oriented largely towards hoarding wealth. People get up and work hard all day long to hoard as much wealth as they can for each other. That's fundamentally about individuals achieving their goals, but in the process, we're destroying our home and we're destroying much of humanity. And the fourth and final element is a structure for information and knowledge. So let's look at each of these in turn. Human processing power. Using Google Hangouts, which is the platform we're using to record this presentation right now, as you can see in the picture on the lower right, with Google Hangouts, you can bring together groups of people, individuals, who can all, from around different parts of the world, all focusing on one given topic and moving that forward by leveraging their combined intelligence. It's extremely powerful. It gives us the power to co-create spontaneously on any topic within the taxonomy of solving the world's problems, or the taxonomy of the global economy, which we're setting out to transform. Now, let's talk briefly about memory. Those same Google Hangouts, you have the option of recording them, just like I'm recording this Hangout, and that turns it into a YouTube video. This is all free. So we now have the resource of conversations that we have being recorded exactly as they happened, and us then being able to access those conversations and leverage technology to turn them into written transcripts, which can then be indexed and searched and parsed, and we essentially have perfect memory coming out of this as we leverage this and other platforms. So now that we've talked about the first two, now let's talk about unified aim, aligning the batteries in the same polarity. Again, with the eradication of hunger, that is a goal that we can all rally around. Everyone wants, virtually everyone wants to eradicate hunger. And again, I point to the Hungerless Games video. And here we're going to be eradicating hunger initially by transforming the cannabis and hemp industry, and ultimately by transforming the entire global economy. But actually, getting back to cannabis and hemp, why do I start with that? Well, Sato Hemp is within that industry, and the cannabis and hemp industry has the potential, once properly legalized and regulated, to generate the $50 billion per year that we need to eradicate hunger. So we could potentially do it with cannabis and hemp alone, though we'll enlist a bunch of other industries in the process. And finally, the fourth and final element is structure for information and knowledge. The structure we're creating with taxonomies, growing, evolving taxonomies, taxonomies of world problems, taxonomies of the global economy and the constituents thereof. I had lunch a couple of weeks ago with Nathan Myhrvold, the legendary chief technology officer of Microsoft, who built all of Microsoft Research, or led it, and is now the head of Intellectual Ventures, the largest intellectual property owner in the world. And one of his famous quotes is, perspective is worth 30 IQ points. And at lunch, I said to him, hey, Nathan, that's perspective within the level of the individual brain, right? What about the perspective that we can generate by having a whole taxonomy and expanding perspective at the level of the global community of people working together to solve whatever problem, whether it's hunger or anything else? And we're going to be following up on that topic. But the bottom line is that we have, with simply off-the-shelf tools and platforms that we're going to be building on Radish, we have the capacity to create a higher form of intelligence by many orders of magnitude over anything terrestrial that we've seen today. So with that higher form of intelligence, the big question is, to what shall we apply this higher form of intelligence? Well, we're going to apply it to eradicating hunger by transforming the cannabis and hemp industry and other industries, such as the livestock industry. And one other application is the reversing of desertification. Reversing desertification will sequester massive amounts of carbon, and that may be the single biggest shot that we have at reversing climate change. And we're going to do that by transforming the livestock industry. Livestock can actually be utilized to reverse desertification and sequester massive amounts of carbon, as you can learn about by watching this 20-minute TED Talk video on the topic given by Alan Savory. Highly recommended. And what that's going to do, speaking of bifurcating the global economy with the CCC standard, we're going to bifurcate the beef industry among many other industries within livestock into unsustainable beef, that which does not follow the practices which are used to reverse desertification, versus sustainable beef, which will be used to reverse desertification. And so people will learn, just like they learn to buy organic milk, they'll learn to buy CCC compassionate, certified compassionate beef, not just compassionate to your own body and compassionate to the animals, but compassionate to the entire planet. And ultimately, as we grow and evolve this higher form of intelligence, we will be able to solve all of the world's most daunting problems by transforming the entire global economy. So the ultimate objective, just to put it in words, the ultimate objective is to transform and ultimately solve all of the world's most daunting problems holistically and simultaneously by transforming the entire global economy, and in so doing, transform life on Earth and how we walk the Earth and our carbon footprint and our footprint on ecosystems and species and everything else. Now, I promised I'd get back to this analogy of the escalating dominoes. At the very far right, we have the story, right? The tiniest domino is simply telling the story about what we're doing. A little bit further on, you have Sato Hemp launching as the first certified compassionate brand. That growth will be slow at first, but then it'll go exponential. And by the time we've achieved even 0.01% penetration of the global economy, that's 1/100th of 1% of the global economy, mainly in the cannabis and hemp industry for starters, but rapidly expanding to other industries, we will be generating $500 million per year for the eradication of hunger. That's real money, and that'll have a real impact, and we'll document that impact. And that will help accelerate the growth in the popularity of the CCC standard. And that'll help us get to milestone 1%, which is where we penetrate 1% of the global economy and carve out 1% of global profits for eradicating hunger, which will give us the $50 billion per year budget that we need to eradicate hunger from all corners of the planet. What's next? The big domino in the picture here, I call milestone 10%. What on earth is milestone 10%? Milestone 10% is when the certified compassionate standard penetrates 10% of the global economy. The global economy spits out about $5 trillion per year in profit. Now today, most of that profit's going to the wealthiest 1%. Once we've carved out 10% of the global economy into the compassionate sector, roughly 10% of that 5 trillion or $500 billion per year will be directing towards eradicating hunger and many other things. Because again, we only need about 50 billion per year to eradicate hunger. So what are we going to do with the other 450 billion? Well, to put it into perspective, $500 billion per year is the equivalent of 150 Bill and Melinda Gates foundations. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation contributes about $3 billion per year to various charities such as education, malaria, etc. Well, when we hit milestone 10%, we're going to have a budget collectively of 150 times that amount. So truly gargantuan budgets. And we only need 1/10 of that to eradicate hunger. With the rest of it, we're going to go after the rest of the world's major problems. And CCC, as you can see through the virtuous cycle, through the story, the conversations, and the actual results, is going to become very, very popular. And that's what's going to help us at the big 50,000 foot level. Planet Earth right now is in a death spiral, and we're kind of spiraling downhill on this default path to devastation, multi-meter sea level rise, mass extinction of species, acceleration of desertification, and it's a vicious cycle. There's still time to peel away from that default death spiral that we're on towards an optimal path, taking us towards utopia, or the closest that we can achieve. And that is where to take that to its final conclusion is where we enlist the help of an even higher form of intelligence still, which I represent here as HFI squared, higher form of intelligence squared. And we talk about that in the next presentation, where we talk about creating a partnership between humanity and machines, including computers and software. So we'll see that on the next presentation. I thank you all for watching, and let me do a stop of the screen share so I can sign off properly. Here we are again. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Dad, for listening, and thank you all for listening. Please submit your comments, questions, anything you have to say at any level in the comments on this YouTube video, and we'll be happy to respond to those and follow up with other videos. And in fact, we can schedule some videos to talk about related topics and thus accelerate the formation and growth of the higher form of intelligence that we've talked about so much in this video. So please be sure to watch the next video as well, where we go into what I call HFI squared, an even higher form of intelligence still, where we create a partnership, a new partnership between humanity and machines, and ultimately, as you can see on some of the images on Radish, a new partnership between people, nature, and machines. So stay tuned, and thanks again for watching.